could be made by a 27-year-old, a 35-year-old, or even a 50-year-old man under similar circumstance?
Under similar circumstance, it's very, very challenging, and the scientific community may not attempt, not only myself, attempt to guess or estimate age of the person who is screaming.
And you can't do that in this case?
I did not attempt.
And you didn't attempt because, based upon what you know from your own work, what you know from being a member of the scientific community, that to do so would be a fool's errand, that you can't come up with a reliable scientific opinion because it's screaming, someone screaming for their life.
In my opinion, that's the consensus among the scientific group or members.
I think with all of that, what you're saying is science really doesn't help us in this case figure out who's screaming.
Unfortunately, that is correct.
The best chance, if any, in your mind would be based upon lay witnesses that have familiarity with the voice of either George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin or both.
That is my opinion, yes, correct.
Are there still the same challenges because it's very limited speech, because it's under high duress, because it's in the background, and the kinds of things that you've talked about already?
Layperson of familiar voice recognition would be the best here, but as you mentioned, yes, there is a challenge, and that challenge would be characterized by the fact that this person has a familiarity. The question is, would this person is in possession of the information about specific perceptual features that they can extract from that yelling and screaming to the same features they can retrieve from their memory about their loved ones and voice who were producing the audio information under the same situations.
So the same situation is still an issue. In other words, you're saying if they can connect something they hear in the recording with something that they know is familiar, that's the best chance you're going to get in this case of someone being able to identify the voice.
It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but somewhat, under similar conditions. Yes.
Would you urge caution to this jury as well in that sort of analysis, trying to figure out lay witness testimony that say they can identify the voice because of all the things you've talked about? Would you urge caution in listening to the opinions of the lay witnesses and suggest it really needs to be in the context of the case?
Judge, I'm going to object. He's asking him to comment on what the jury should consider.
The judge will give the instructions to the jury at the end of the case when the evidence is complete, and those are the instructions that the jury will follow. Your objection is sustained.
May I have just one moment, Judge? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nakasone.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Please, Your Honor. So, Doctor, what I understand you to say by specific perceptual features is the best type of person to make these sorts of judgments, even on a sample like this, is someone who's heard the potential speaker under sort of similar circumstances.
That is correct.
So they've heard them upset or in distress before.
Yes.
As far, would you say that they would have that kind of listener would have an advantage over someone who's never heard the person upset or in great distress before?
No, it's fine, I'm sorry.
I think the person who has heard same features from both voices would be more reliable than individual who claims he is familiar with certain people, but everything what he heard from this particular person are coming from a normal type of conversation.
Thank you. You referenced talking about standards of desiring 30 seconds or that sort of thing of speech and words. That was as it relates to, and I just want to make sure that we're very clear on this point, all of those standards and things like that, those were as it relates to your desire to conduct a computer-assisted or an algorithm-assisted examination, not the sort of lay listener type approach. Am I right about that?
That is correct.
Okay. And as far as this idea of, because before I leave that point, I think I heard you say earlier that, for example, if you were talking on the phone with your mom, it might only take you a word or two.
That is correct.
Okay.
Doesn't take too long. A few seconds.
And as I want to go back to this idea of examiner bias and why you as a scientist try to avoid it. As I understand it, in an ideal, you try to make things as a scientist as ideal as possible, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you work you attempt to control as many variables as you can. Do you think that law enforcement techniques or practices or things of that nature mirror what should go on in a laboratory?
No, we do not have any saying about what they do unless I'm specifically request to give them guidance, but otherwise usually say like we prefer the voices will be recorded by a high fidelity microphone tape recorder, but most of the voices we receive were recorded by a variety of random recording devices. We take them all.
And just so I'm clear on this concept of what you refer to as the potential bias, again, you were talking in context of having a scientist conduct what you called an unfamiliar voice analysis, the computer-assisted or that type of identification where you don't know or have never heard the supposed speaker's voice before, right?
Yes.
Okay.
However, though, that happens also in the voice lineup situation. We recommend to FBI agents when asked.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sorry.
The witness finished his answer.
Certainly. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Doctor. Were you done yet?
No, he wasn't done yet.
Please avoid your comments.
Yes, Judge.
Go ahead, Doctor, you may continue.
I said the effort guide them to remove any bias effect happens not only to the technical analysis for unfamiliar voices, but also it is equally important. The same, safeguard against bias would be as important in the familiar voice recognition as well. To remove risk of bias and also to improve the credibility of the results of this, identification procedure.
If I heard you about voice lineups, you're talking about a situation where possibly a victim of a crime, is asked to come down and listen to potential suspects say what the perpetrator said? Is that what you're talking about, a voice lineup?
Yeah, that would be part of that too.
Okay.
But sometimes it happens, there's not enough, quality in the very lengthy, voice recordings happening in the, federal cases. And I recommend only thing they can do would be to find somebody who are familiar with the voices. And then advise them, if they have, say, 3 or 4 potential individuals who presumably familiar with the voice, advise them to have each listen to the recorded voice of the target individual separately, one at a time. That's part of the my recommendation. Okay.
If we're talking about the potential for bias, that is exactly what it is, right? A potential?
Yes.
Okay. If I were to have you and another person familiar with your mother's voice listen to it together, are you worried that that would compromise your ability to recognize someone with whose voice you are so familiar?
Well, there's always a chance.
Okay.
I might get compromised.
When you say there's a chance,
Yes.
it certainly doesn't mean it's going to happen, does it?
Objection, leading.
Ma'am, if two voices at hand we have to compare are so obviously different, or so obviously same, the chance of examiner bias might be lesser than the situation in which two voices sound alike or very difficult to analyze. And I think the examiner's human, they have a tendency to sort of follow the leader. And that happens, and the bias issue is a very serious, topic embedded within the scientific working group for speaker recognition as well. It's a very serious issue.
Does bias work both ways? And by that I mean, if you go into it not wanting or assuming that you're not hearing the same voice, does it?
It can go either way.
Okay. As far as familiar voice identification goes, understanding the frailties of this particular tape, understanding the